Someone asked me if I usually teach how to draw, and I said, of course, I will teach you how to draw, especially if you pay me for it. But it just made me to think about like how would I teach someone how to draw? Like if I were to explain to someone like the process on how to become an artist, on how to actually have the ability to draw and create a figure or create something on a canvas. The first thing that came to my mind was that first of all, if you want to learn how to draw, you need to have a mindset of accepting failure. You need to be willing to fail a lot, because if you're like an absolute beginner with like zero level talent or like zero level affinity, starting to draw is going to be very difficult. It's going to be tricky, it's going to stress you out, and it's going to be frustrating. Even I myself have spent over a decade drawing, and a lot of things still frustrate me up to now. I have techniques on how to handle them and make the whole process easier for me, but I am still learning how to draw. Drawing is a continuous learning process, but there are things that you have to continuously do to sharpen your mind, right? Like a whetstone. There are practices that you have to do to continually make you better, and so that you can continually improve and you don't get stuck or regress as a whole. So the first thing I'm going to have to tell the person is that you have to have a mindset, right? That drawing is a skill and it's not necessarily a talent. Of course, there are people with more affinity for it that naturally they are able to draw, and they have good observational skills, and they're able to like replicate what they see naturally, of course. But I still believe that is a skill, and the evidence that it is a skill is the fact that even those people with talent can become even better artists by the sheer fact of like doing some certain techniques or using some certain systematic approach towards learning that makes them better. And if that can happen, definitely people that have almost zero talent can develop it as a skill by continuous applied effort. And people need to understand that they can improve through observation, through correction, and by not giving up, by being consistent, right? You do it every day as much as possible. And if you are learning to draw, in the aspect of mindset, right, you also have to be able to know what your goal is. Like, what do you want to learn how to draw for? Like, do you want it to be a profession? And if you want it to be a profession, like, what profession do you want to do? Do you want to be a comic book artist? Do you want to be a vis dev artist? Do you want to focus on portraits? Do you want to do landscapes? Do you want to do seascapes? Do you want to do cityscapes? Like, do you want to do children's book? Like, do you want to work in animation? Right? All these areas are different spheres of art, right? And you have to pick a goal, because a goal is what is going to make you focus on one thing, and it's going to drive your focus, and it's going to show you like the things that you need to concentrate more on in order to be a better artist or a really skilled artist in that department. It's sort of like in sports, right? If you are like a footballer, like footballers usually they are grouped into attackers, midfielders, and then the defenders. And all these three aspects of this sport, usually they have a skill set that these other parts of the team don't usually have. They may have it, but like they have it to a lesser degree than those that are specialists, right? They are all footballers, they are all athletes, but they specialize in just one part of the pitch. They specialize in just one aspect of that particular sport. The defenders, the midfielders, and the attackers, right? And each of them have their own role to play. They are all very important to the success of a team. It's the same thing with art, right? There are different myriad aspects of art that you can learn, but you need to sort of like pick one and have a goal on what you want to understand and learn, so that you can actually direct your focus, and the learning process will be much more faster, and you can see success in your art a lot more quicker. So that is the thing that you need to have at the back of your mind. The next thing is that the basics, understanding the basics is very important. Me personally, for a long time, have just been cruising through art. Yeah, what I usually did was that, like, if I was scrolling on Pinterest and I saw like a study that was cool to learn, I would just pick it up and just like do rough studies on it, right? I never actually properly in my whole life of being an artist sat down to do studies, right? To do studies continuously over a period of time so that I can actually get better. I would say that I have natural talent, right? But like my art never got to the level that I wanted to it to get to. until I began sitting down and figuring out my weaknesses and actually addressing those weaknesses one by one. And I had to be patient with myself for me to get good. Currently, in my art journey, I am not good at perspective, right? I suck at perspective, but it doesn't restrict me from creating like my comic, from working on the things that I want to work on, right? I still work on my comics and I still do projects and commissions for people, right? And I get paid doing what I enjoy. Not necessarily that I enjoy the fact that I'm working for people, right? It's my dream not to, but like my dream is like to actually make money and survive. Well, not survive, thrive off of like my art, right? So you have to understand the basics for that to happen. You need to be able to understand that anatomy is important, right? Composition is important, values are important. Like if your art looks trash, like objectively, if your art sucks, right, it looks like poo poo, yeah, it looks like bull crap, right? And objectively it does, right? There's nothing to worry about, yeah. It's just the mere sheer facts that you don't understand the art fundamentals. You don't understand certain basics that will actually make that art look better than it does. You don't have the skill set. It's a skill. You don't have that particular skill, and you don't develop that skill for that art to look as stunning as someone who has like spent a large number of years understanding the fundamentals that will actually make that work look good. It's sort of like a farmer, right? If a random person were to just become a farmer, like the plants that person is going to grow, or like how healthy the crops that person develops or grows, is going to be of a different quality from someone that has been farming for like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, right? Because the farmer understands what it takes to actually give life, right, to a plant, to actually monitor the growth process of a plant. That is a skill in itself, and it can be learned. It's the same thing with art. So you have to understand the fundamentals, right, for you to actually be able to create the art that you want, right? If you see a portrait, you can easily dissect it, you can easily break it down, and you can know like if you are making a mistakes and correct it immediately to actually achieve the desired results that you want. So understanding the fundamentals is very important, and it's not something that you just go head in like and just do it 100%. I believe that you have a goal, that mindset part that I talked about. You have a goal, you have something you want to learn, right? You have something you want to achieve, and then you pick parts of the fundamentals that are very important to achieving that. What I mean by that is that like you don't necessarily need to understand everything about art for you to create good art, for you to create art that is serviceable, right? So for me, I've always been interested in character design, and I've always been interested in making comics. And what that involves is that you're going to understand like all the fundamentals of art are very important, but there are certain aspects that you will need to pay more attention to than others, right? Or that you need to get first. Right? If you don't understand anatomy, you won't really draw like great looking comics, right? Because anatomy is very important in figure drawing. Unless your comics is about boxes or circles, right? You won't necessarily be able to execute a good comic. Like you won't be able to draw a good comic that will convince people to stay for the art. Even if you are Shakespeare, right, your artwork, is usually, if it's comic or sequential arts that you're doing, your art is usually what will make people to stay. So that is why you need to understand anatomy for comics. So that's like an important aspect. It's the same thing with viz dev, right? You need to understand values, right? You need to understand environment. Like you need to understand some basic principles about composition for you to be able to execute and draw an environment that would be used for like animation or whatever else viz dev is being used for. So there are things that are very, very vital. And what I did, there was a time that I did sort of like a breakdown on the things to focus on in order for you to actually be good at character art, or in my case comics. And one of the things is that I broke them down into phases. And one of the things I talked about was anatomy, right? And the focus would be on structure and proportion. On phase 2, the thing I would focus on is value, which is shading, rendering, and contrast. Because in comics, for instance, right, when I've already talked about anatomy, you need to understand figure drawing and how to break a pose down, how to execute a pose in different angles, so that you can, convey the information that you want to convey if you're doing comics or if you're doing character design or character arts. Because body language can communicate a feeling or how or the predispositions of a person, even without necessarily that person opening their mouth, right? There's a lot that body language can do, and you need to understand anatomy and figure drawing for you to be able to execute something like that. So in terms of like the form, understanding form value, being able to give something that you've drawn a 3D effect to make it feel like it can be held, it can be touched, and it can be felt. You need to understand shading, you need to understand rendering, and you need to understand contrast, because this is something that if you were doing comics, this is something you will use. Even if you are doing like any aspect, the reason why it's a fundamental is because it can be applied to any aspect of art, and it is vital to it, right? Whether you are doing animation, whether you are doing viz dev, whether you are doing 3D, it is very important for you to understand something like this. That is what is going to give form, right? So the next phase I talked about, remember, I'm still talking about, what you should focus on or improve if you are doing comic books or if you are doing like character art, right? This is sort of like the things I would focus on, right? The next thing is color and light, right? I necessarily have understood color, but color and lighting in comics is kind of a bit different, right? I haven't studied it a lot, so I can't really speak on it. What I can speak about is color and light in terms of like drawing things, single things such as like portraits, drawing a figure, drawing props and things like that. But I've not necessarily understood color and light in general, but these are things that usually you would focus on. In fact, if I were to change this, I would focus more on perspective than color and light, right? Because perspective is what's going to allow you to understand the space in which your character is in, right? Or like the object in which you are drawing in a comic or like just a single illustration. It will help you to understand it. So things such as proportions, perspective, gesture, these are the foundation of almost any good drawing, and they are vital for you to understand that. And the next thing I did was that I moved from perspective, understand the principles of perspective, to the next phase, which is anatomy, understanding the muscles, the skeleton, the intestine. Even if you want to understand the gullet or esophagus, that is up to you, right? So the things that I focus on are mostly these 4 aspects or 5 aspects. Trying to understand anatomy, color, form or value, perspective, right? And then I go back again and again and again and again and again, and I do practices as much as possible to actually get good at drawing this stuff. Yeah. So that is the next thing that you need to have in your mind, right? You need to have a mindset for drawing, right? There's a mindset you have to have for drawing. The next thing is that you have to understand the fundamentals. Even if you don't, you need to grasp the principles of the fundamentals and just have an idea of them, even though you don't understand or you haven't mastered them. You have to understand why they are important and why they are vital. And these are the first 2 things that I'm going to try to put into the brain of the person that I'm trying to teach how to draw. The next thing is that you need to understand how to break complex forms using simple shapes. You need to understand how to turn a head. You need to understand how to break a head using spheres, using boxes. You need to understand how to break the torso using boxes, using simple shapes or simple lines, right? How to maybe use a sphere or an egg shape or ovoid shape to break down the skull in the side view. How to use that to break down, what do they call that part of the body? The rib cage, right? Where the torso is going to be. How to use cylinders to break down the legs, the arms, the limbs in general, right? How to deconstruct complex poses, right? These are very important if you want to learn how to draw. So that's what I'm going to emphasize. As much as funny as it is, you need to understand simple shapes, right? You need to understand cones. You need to understand cylinders, and you need to understand how to use that in space, right? If you are drawing an arm trying to punch a screen, you need to understand how to deconstruct that because it's foreshortening. You need to understand how to deconstruct that particular pose and, break that down and break down the fingers, right, that are in front of the screen, and break down the character. But you don't do that if you don't understand simple shapes, right? You won't be able to break down, complex forms. So that's the 3rd thing I'm going to talk about. The 4th thing I'm going to talk about is that you need to work on your observation. Even the thing about understanding all these fundamentals, what it's going to do is that you are going to be a lot more observant. You're going to understand why a texture works for a particular object and why a texture does not work for this other object. You understand how, like, when light hits an object, why that object feels and looks the way it does. You'll be able to understand why a person's eye is a particular shape, and is different from, like, looking at that person from a front view, a side view, a three-quarter view, or even a back view. You're going to understand how all these shapes interact, and you'll be able to interpret them in the simplest way that your brain can understand. That is, one of the things I'm going to talk about. And another thing I'm going to talk about is consistency, because, when you see all this really amazing art, like all this, art that, there's so much color, there's just beauty. They are drawing all these animals, they're drawing dragons, they're drawing these amazing warriors, they're doing all these comics, and they look so cool, they look so amazing. You have a manga that you're looking at, you have a manga artist that you look up to and stuff like that. And it's just so cool, and you really want to do something like this. All that is great, but they don't matter, and you won't even reach that level if you don't have consistency, right? You may be motivated, right? And motivation is good. But what carries you to become good, what makes you better, what makes you great, what makes you outstanding, what even makes you decent, not even exceptional, is the fact that you are consistent, right? You draw every day, you practice every day. As boring as that sounds, that is actually the truth. That's why you actually have to sort of, love it for you to actually get good at it. Like, I draw every day, right? I'm a professional artist, and I have no option than to draw every day. And if I don't love it, if I don't love drawing, right, there is no way that I'm going to be able to continue, because a lot of the works that I do, right, because I have to work to eat, and put food on the table and pay the bills, right, and things like that. If you don't like what you're doing, when it becomes hard, right, when all these boring projects and like things, and all these boring projects, all these difficult works, like the slog of the art process, right, you won't be able to get through it, because you'll just give up. You'll just give up, and there's no way to actually progress and actually go into a slog. Usually there is a slog, whether it's like when you're learning art, whether it's like when you need to do a couple of commissions like that you don't like, take up certain jobs that you don't like, but you need to pay the bills, and you actually have to work at that job. If you don't love art, if you don't love drawing, if you don't love the idea of it, it's going to suck, and you're going to quit. That's just the general thing about art. But if you're doing it for a hobby, just know that, of course, your growth process is going to be much more slower than if you're taking it as a profession. And you need to develop consistency. It's very, very, very vital for you to develop consistency, right? You don't always need to feel inspired. If you're always like looking to feel inspired, or looking to see an amazing work, of course that can happen, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you always need to see an amazing work before you actually pick up a pen and draw, it's probably not for you. It's probably not for you. You just need consistency. You need to develop like things that will make you, do sort of like small practice sessions that will make your skill improve and the development to compound fast. The next thing I'll let that person know, it's also part of mindset, but I'm just going to put it in a different section, is that mistakes are part of the process. Remember when I said that, you have to have the mindset of failure. You have to be willing to fail over and over and over and over again. And the only way you get better, like I say, is one thing I've learned, is with volume. If you suck at inking, you need to do as many inks as you can humanly do. If you suck at sketching, you need to do as many sketch as possible. Now, do that study with, of course, the basic principles, right, that you can apply towards sketching, how to sketch. Like maybe you watch a how to sketch video, and then you understand, these are the things, the mindset you have to have whenever sketching. All right, I need to employ this tactic. I need to ask myself this question. I need to do this, right, when sketching. Once you have that in your head, execution is what is actually going to, what is going to make you better. Execution. Even if you have no training, right? Just the sheer fact of practice, you're going to get better at that particular part of art that you suck at. That is what I try to tell people. Like, if you are not good at sketching, you develop a routine. Yeah, you develop a routine, and just know, have it at the back of your mind, that you're going to suck. You're going to draw a lot of ugly drawings. You're going to draw humans as fishes. You're going to draw, like, when you don't mean it. Yeah, you're going to do a lot of ugly stuff, right? Your line weights and your technique is going to suck. It's not going to look professional. But if you keep at it, by the time you've done the 10th one, by the time you've done the 20th one, by the time you've done the 50th one, if you ask yourself honestly, like if you suck at portrait, for instance, and you actually went to learn like how to draw portraits, I actually followed, like, for instance, the Andrew Loomis method on how to draw the face, and you practiced 100 portraits, and you practice 100 portraits in a week, do you think that you get better at doing portraits or not? Of course you get better, because each of these phases that you do, each drawing that you do, is just an extra strand. Like, you're developing your mind to get comfortable with drawing portraits, to get comfortable with the difficulty of breaking down portraits, right? And that is just how it works with every single, like, fundamental and every single aspect of art. It's difficult, of course, but you need to get accustomed to drawing ugly stuff, yeah, and to sucking, yeah, and like, no matter what phase you do. And that is just how you have to look at it if you really want to learn how to draw, yeah. And you need to be willing to accept feedback. You need to be willing to accept feedback, and every single time that you draw something and you suck at it, that you need to be able to understand what actually sucks about this drawing, and it's just an indication of the areas that you need to improve at. So that's just another thing. The next thing you need to understand is that, like, this is a mistake most people make, is that details are actually the last thing you should look at whenever you're drawing. Like, if you're drawing, the first thing you need to understand is the structure, right? You need to understand structure. Detail is what comes last. If you look at any artist that draws, right, usually you see that there is usually a phase. There is the sketch phase, there is the inking phase, there's the coloring phase, and then there's the detailing phase and all that, right? You need to understand how to break down stuff using structure. If you're not able to get the structure of a particular pose, right, or like the outlines looks off, right, no matter how much detail you put into that work, it will still be an ugly work, right? Let me give you an example real quick. Yeah, if you were to draw a person, right, a muscular guy, if you don't understand the shapes that actually make that person, right, something like this, if you don't understand the shape that actually makes that person, no matter how much details, right, you put, like if you put the pose of the person's chest and like the abs and whatever, it doesn't matter whatever detail you put, if you don't, the shape is not correct, it's going to look awful. Like, if you just draw like a person like this, yeah, like wiggly lines like this, and in your own mind this is the interpretation of what like a real human being's figure looks like, because you don't understand structure, no matter how much details you put into that work, no matter the type of lighting you do and apply to that work, people won't be able to compute what you're drawing. That is why structure is important. You need to understand simple shapes to be able to break down complex forms, and then you can of course apply the detail. So details should come last. The next thing is that references. Whenever you draw, use references. Believe it or not, thousands of artists have said this. They use references, but for whatever reason, like, I don't know why, like, it's usually the beginners that most of the beginners rather, that usually have a problem with references because of ego or something. Like, if I don't know how to draw something, I don't know how to draw something. There's nothing you can do about it. If you don't have if your visual library is not developed to the point where you can work on it from memory, then there is just nothing you can do. Use freaking references. A lot of the times whenever I work on my comic, yeah, and there is just like a pose that I just can't get, right? Even if it's a simple pose in theory, but I just can't get the pose, I pose myself and I use myself as a reference for that particular pose or that particular page or that particular panel, right? I go online and I look for references of buildings if I want to draw a skyline to understand how it actually is. You shouldn't have like egos. The thing about art or any skill, you have to be teachable. You have to be willing to humble yourself and learn, especially if you know your level of skill or your ability. That is just my opinion, right? Be patient with yourself, understand failure, and use references, right? References is not cheating, right? They are helping you. Actually, references actually help you to improve accuracy, and they help you to improve like how the thing actually looks, to get it close to what it actually looks, the proportion of the thing, and it just helps you develop visual understanding of what you're putting down on your page. Very important. Use references. The next thing is that you should develop practice routines. I know I've said this in one of these tips, but like, develop practice routines. It can be as little as possible. It can be 30 minutes, it can be 10 minutes, it can be 5 minutes, but just try as much as possible to practice as often as you can. Develop practice routines. Practice routine is what is going to actually take you from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 to level 4 in art, right? You see this, there are things like, I call them sort of like, if you look at athletes, you see that athletes maybe like, there will be charts for like speed, there will be charts for physicality or strength, there will be charts for like technicality and things like that. And if you compare an athlete to another athlete, you are going to see like how most of these graphs or like lines overlap each other based on their ability and based on like what they've specialized in. It's the same thing with art, right? If you focus on a particular area and you actually want to develop yourself, there is no other way to get to another level, right, of being an artist than if you actually practice. You need to practice for you to get better, so that you can make your connection to whatever it is that you're studying stronger, so that you can then apply it whenever you are drawing. Of course, there are people that are born with talents. There are people, of course, there are people that are born with the talent of drawing. There are people that are, the same way there are people that are born with talent of being, good at math and things like that naturally without having to go through extra training. But it's still a skill at the end of the day. It's still something that you can sit down and learn with dedicated and consistent effort. And that is how I will teach someone how to draw. Or that's the things rather I'll tell someone that wants to learn how to draw. Hopefully this helped. Thank you all for 2,000 subscribers. I really appreciate every single one of you. I am so grateful, and I'll see you guys in the next video. If you have any question, please if you have any question, please let me know, and I'll try and answer it probably in a video or in the comment section there. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Please like and subscribe, click on the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video.